It's really pleasure for me to be here, talking on something very dear to my heart, and that is dyslexia, dysgraphia, and learning disability. For the last 10 years, I'm spending my time specializing in this area. I started pediatric neurology, and I had a chance to see seizures, brain tumors, epilepsy, cerebral palsy. And then eventually you realize that you settle in area that is very dear to your heart, and that is LD, learning disability, autism, and that's exactly what we are doing. At Karnik Institute, that's what we will be doing for next many years, and with your blessing and God's blessing, we'll be very successful, helping many children who need help and take them to next millennium, next 100 years, next 10 years, and that's our goal, to design, develop some new plans so we can help them. We really don't know when reading and writing began historically, but the feeling is that almost 5,000 years ago, somewhere around Greece, Rome, Indus Valley, which is part of India, the whole thing began. And there is evidence that Mesopotamia, which is right in the center of Middle East, that's where the writing began. And it was very primitive writing. And it was essential for people to convey ideas. And when they wanted to write about horse, they drew horse. If they wanted to write or talk about cattle, they drew cattle. And so the writing and reading was extremely premature at that age. So some smart guys thought that maybe we should develop symbols, and the symbols could have a sound, and they designed geometrical designs like lines, 3 lines touching in the center, or half circles, and all that. And that's how the writing and reading began at the same time. Now, reading and writing was very privileged activity. It was reserved for nobles or high intellect. And historical data shows that somewhere in Babylonia and Sumer, which were very prominent cities at that time, which had a population of about 12,000 to 20,000, only 50 or 100 could read or write. And they were all related to king or the administrator. And so it was not activity that was open to anyone. Of course, later on, the whole thing changed, and more people started reading and writing. And that recognized the fact that not everyone can read or write well. Some, in spite of training them for years and years, they could not read or write. And that became a starter point for reading disorder and writing disorder. This began somewhere around 1,000 years ago when people started writing on leaves and different animal products. And they also recognized that people who could not read and write, they had ability to remember. And especially Socrates said during his time that we are wasting time training people to read or write because they will lose the ability to remember and their cognitive functions will go down. How wrong a great philosopher was. And you know now that without reading or writing, we cannot do anything. The first medical evidence that there was something about reading came in 1881. It came from Germany, and this was a scientist and neurologist who practiced as a physician at that time, and his name was Oswald Burkhan. He, while examining a lot of adults, realized that they were smart, but they just simply could not read. And so he wrote an article in German language, which really was not popular, so he never went anywhere with that article, that there is a condition in which a person can be smart and yet they cannot read. Nobody read that article, unfortunately, until about 10 years later, when ophthalmologists, again in Germany, who saw children, and he was referred because they thought that reading was eye problem. And during that, conventional wisdom was, if you have problem reading, you refer to eye doctor. Berlin was ophthalmologist. He saw children after children who could not read. And he realized that their eye was fine, their cornea was okay, everything was fine, but they could not read. And he realized that the problem of reading was not eye, but it was brain. And that was the first documented history in medical literature that brain leads to reading disorder in some children. He realized that symbol writing was lexicon. And if you have a problem reading the symbol, it was dys, and he coined the term dyslexicon or dyslexia. And that term is still popular today. And guess what our name of conference is? Dyslexia. After 100 years, we still use that name. Dr. Morgan from England had no idea that somebody wrote article in German. And so he described similar situation. In fact, he presented data in medical society that there are many children who just can't read. And he called them congenital word blindness. And for a time, that term was popular until people realized that that term doesn't connote positive like blindness, and they went back to dyslexia, and that term became popular since then. So therefore, dyslexia is a condition in which children or adults have problem reading. According to National Institute of Neurological Disorder and Stroke, they define that as difficulty in reading, but along with that, they got to have difficulty in spelling. And so if you see it, that difficulty in spelling goes with reading. But more than reading and spelling, they realize that people who have this problem, they have phonological awareness and processing difficulties. Now, what that is very simple to understand. When you write C-A-T, the sound C is ka, A is a, and T is ta. And that awareness that each symbol has a sound, and that sound is specific to that symbol, is what we call awareness. And therefore, visual symbols, which are letters and all that, has sound symbol, and that connection is called phonological awareness. Children with dyslexia, they have problem in that awareness. So they see a word, cat or a dog or a hat, and they don't know how to put it together. Their sounding is not right. The other problem is not just awareness, but they have processing issue. That means when they see or hear the sound, that goes to the brain, and that brain analyzes that sound, and then it transfers the signal from auditory cortex to sound producing area of brain. We'll see that as we go down. And there was a delay in connections. There was a problem in that connection between a hearing area of brain and sound producing area of brain, and that processing was delayed, and that later on was called phonological processing. So in dyslexia, there are 2 or 3 components that are essential. One is they have problem in reading, they have problem in spelling, they have problem in processing, and they have problem in phonological awareness. So when we neurologists diagnose this condition, we have to take this into consideration, and if they don't have it, they probably have reading disorder and not dyslexia. Dyslexia does not mean that the child or that person is not smart. Look at historical figures. Alexander Graham Bell, Leonardo da Vinci, and many others, very big leaders and scientists, they were diagnosed or known to have dyslexia. So it's not that they are not bright. They can be extremely bright. Charles Schwab says that he could not read when he was a young kid. He changed the world in numbers and money today, and he's doing or helping research in this area. So many others are doing it. This is just a small list. When I was looking at it, the list went on for 500 to 1,000 people, and so there are so many leaders and artists have this condition. Later on, as we recognized that it was a brain problem, a lot of research went into brain science. And that research, especially the research were on adult, many neurologists realized that there were many smart people, but they had a stroke or they had a head injury, and they lost the ability of reading. We call that term, when they were reading before and lost that ability, is alexia and not dyslexia. Dyslexia means you never had that function well before. So they become alexic. They could not read. And when autopsies were done, a very common abnormality was seen. The area right here on the brain on the left side, whenever that area got damaged, they had ability to read, but they simply could not read. And so it was localized that the problem is somewhere on the left side. And that concept continued for a long, long time. Studies later on identified that that structure right on the left side, which was important for reading, as we call it, reading area of brain, or angular gyrus, that area was mildly malformed, not developed well. They had smaller gyral pattern, we call it microgyria, and small abnormalities were detected. There were abnormalities of blood vessels. The blood vessels were not as big as they should have been. But still, we know that there is no structural abnormality. The problem of dyslexia is functional, it's genetic, is transferred through genes, and that came later on. The association between speech development and reading became evident. In fact, 80% of children who had reading delays eventually lead to weakness in reading. They had weakness in writing, they had weakness in spelling. And so therefore, there was a great association on clinical trials that there was a problem with speech development and also reading. Studies, again from Germany, showed that there was a connection between a reading center right here and hearing center and the pathways for the hearing, what we call medial geniculate body. It's green right in the down somewhere here, and that area was noted to be abnormal, or the pathways between the medial geniculate body, which is in green, and the blue area, auditory cortex, those pathways were not developed very well. And so there is a very, very good reason for us to believe that stimulating hearing is very important for reading. In fact, I wish human had such big ears. That's why animals don't have dyslexia. As I mentioned to you, genetic studies showed that there were 3 chromosomes or genetic material that were blamed for a problem with reading disorder. It was chromosome 3, chromosome 6, and chromosome 15. We do believe that chromosome 15 is abnormal for ADHD and learning disability, and so there is a big connection between those chromosomes. But not until the recent development in neuroscience, we really knew what was going on inside the brain. The previous thing was brain material after adult or children demise. Doing the autopsies, they studied it, and there was no way of studying brain specimen in live, real life. This new thing, which was developed later on, functional magnetic scan, changed the whole look at dysgraphia and dyslexia. Now, we can actually test children and adults while they're reading, and we can see what's happening inside the brain. And that fMRI scan has changed the whole idea how our brain works. Many years ago, that red area right on the angular gyrus was the only area that people thought was doing a reading job. But now we know that we have a reading system in a brain on both sides. On left side, we have a red area where the word is analyzed. But when you look at the word, it goes to that yellow section of brain, which is the occipital part of brain. That's where we see A as 3 lines, B as a line, and 2 half circles. And that message goes to the red area, which is the parieto-temporal or angular gyrus. That's where the meaning is developed, that this line sounds as A, or this structure sounds like B. And that analysis is done in this posterior part of brain. Now that goes to the front portion, which is the Broca's area, that is the green here, and that area gives us the ability to sound it like A, or cat, or dog, or dad, mom. And therefore, all these sections and centers work in harmony. They got to be connected well. The fiber and pathways must work extremely well and fast so that we can read well and we can do reading in much better harmony. Children with dyslexia, they have a problem. They have absent of posterior system, as we call it, and therefore you'll notice that those who have dyslexia, they have less cortex function in the backside, and that is red and yellow area is generally not seen. And some of the real scan studies, this is one of the real MRI scan, will show you that children with typical reading function, they're fine, they have no problem. They have all 3 anterior and posterior section of brain which allows us to read well. But those who are dyslexic, they're working on a weak area of brain, which is the frontal area. We also have a weak area on the right side, and they work on left frontal and right parietal area, but they have no posterior areas. The interesting fact, though, with this research was that even if they don't have a good structure to begin with, the remedial programs that we use, either Take Flight or Orton-Gillingham program, or no matter what program you use, you can convert brain from the top, which is a weak brain, to absolutely a normal brain. That is completely possible today. That's the great news for children and adults with dyslexia, that we can convert it, but you have to identify it very early. There is something about pruning. We'll talk about pruning this afternoon, and I want to show you some brain slides. And you'll realize that identifying that very early is very, very key. Never giving up and putting them through training program after training program after training program is highly essential. And you can convert the brain which has a problem into a brain which does not have a problem. So today, it can be changed. United States was somewhat behind in Europeans in learning disability. The first real good example of work was done by Samuel Orton. He was a neurologist. He worked in Massachusetts as a neurologist working on stroke patients. And he realized that after stroke, they lost the ability to read, as we call it alexia. That triggered interest, and we went to Iowa. He had clinic for children, and he evaluated children with learning disability, dyslexia. And there he did his original research. Then he came to Columbia, and at that Columbia, he met Gillingham, who was a psychologist. And Orton and Gillingham done extreme work in dyslexia, and they developed a multisensory language-based program, which we still use today. And that was designed and developed 1925. It's one of the best programs that anyone can follow and help children. Now we are in 2000, and the whole thing has changed. We are now in technology, and we are looking at all this thing as old ideas. because we are going into and moving forward into futuristic neuroeducation. One of the things that we think, neurologists as well as neuroscientists who are working in this field of neuroeducation, and that's the area that I have tremendous interest in. It's changing the way we teach children. And so we are going into a new thing. This is how the classrooms are going to be. The classes are not going to be rows of benches, teacher teaching on a board and all that. It will be electronic. We feel that many, many children will have opportunity to stay on computer and learn in a different way. It's not just a book. It's not a script. In fact, one of my research right now going on, it changed the font, changed the way we present data. And actually, that's what we are doing it right now. So hopefully, in next few months or few years, we'll have a total different way of giving this material to children who have problem reading the way they were given before. So all this is happening as we speak. This is a classic example how things are changing. What you see here is a platform called Z Space. But Z Space is amazing. And that will be coming in school. In fact, it's a little, three-dimensional augmentative reality program. Children can pick up anything that they want to pick up. For example, if they're learning about body and they want to study heart, they can touch the heart, pick it up, hold it in hand. They can dissect heart section after section after section. They can see the inside of structure. And they don't have to read it. It just gives the whole information comes to them while they're dissecting it. They can hear it, they can see it, and they can do it. How good that experience is. In fact, we had actually experienced that in California not a long time ago. And this is something that will be coming up. Now, our interests are in neuroeducation. That's what Karnik Institute is designing. And we are so lucky to have a very prominent thinker in Texas. And this is Christy Neville, and I'm so proud to have her on our team. And she's directing a lot of scientists and a lot of engineers to design some of the new programs here in Austin. And we are now starting another startup in Silicon Valley of India, Bangalore, and Mumbai. So she'll be directing that very soon. This is a place where a lot of research is going on. You can see that most of the American top companies are presented. Our company is somewhere a little bit in small room, 500 square foot, without any AC and without anything. And our neuroscientists and engineers are working on designing some of the new programs that will be using it in Austin and this country. So what we are doing is we are developing some software designs, we are developing neuro games, and we are developing brain-computer interface. The idea is that use this technology, that's where we are going in neuroeducation, to stimulate reading and writing and get them into new platform. And I think this is what is going to happen in next few years. Hopefully, Austin will be one of the great places to have it. And in fact, right now we are recruiting some students, and I think they're doing some evaluations today, or they're going to do some testing today. So we are recruiting actually students for our research, and we are starting our research about 2-3 weeks ago. So be part, if you have children have dyslexia, that we would like to get them in our font technology. I think we can change the world, how they're reading in future. So in summary, dyslexia is quite common. 10% to 12% of children have dyslexia. The best news is it has good prognosis. If we identify them very early, and if we treat them, manage them early, they have a great future. We are developing, designing new technologies, new ways of giving information, and that will infiltrate in school system. Next school is going to be neuroeducational, and those are the schools that will benefit these children. And I think the future seems great. I'm so happy that I'm practicing today with all these things happening around us. And it's so great to be a neurologist, neuroscientist, to help brain from somewhere all the way up so that they have bright future. So that is where I want to end today's talk. Thank you for coming. I appreciate my time. Thank you.